except for somehow I have lost. Let me just click on this. Oh, there we go. Yep, I'm back.
All right, cool. All right, well, let's get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone, if you're on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast or somewhere in between. Thanks for being here for today's webinar, The Sky's the Limit, Build a Rockin Major Gifts Program from Scratch. And my name is Stephen Shattuck, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And just a couple of house cleaning items before we begin. Just want to let everyone know that we are recording this presentation, and I'll be sending out that recording along with the slides a little later on this afternoon. So if you have to leave early or if you want to review the content, you will be able to do that later on. So look for an email from me later on this afternoon. And just so everyone knows, this webinars are interactive, so as you're listening, feel free to send any questions to me and the presenter along the way. We'll answer those questions in the formal Q&A session towards the end of the presentation. So I want to go ahead and introduce our guest. She is Kathie Kramer Ryan, MS. Hey there, Kathie. How's it going?
I'm doing well, Stephen. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here. This should be a lot of fun. And for those of you who don't know Kathie, she's worked in development and leadership positions in the nonprofit sector for about 15 years. She served as a development director where she raised over $40 million. She has a passion for connecting donors to the causes they care about, and that led her to launch her consulting business, Arroyo Fundraising, in 2011. And there she enjoys sharing her knowledge of nonprofit management and fund development with other fundraising professionals. And Kathie is a past president of the AFP chapter in Colorado, and she currently serves on the steering committee and chairs the mentor committee for the Institute for Leaders in Development at the University of Denver. She's also held numerous board, committee, and advisory positions. So this should be a lot of fun. This is going to be a really great presentation. I had a chance to look at the slides a little earlier today. This should be really good, and I want everyone to please be encouraged to send some questions our way. Kathie will be available at the end to answer any of your questions for about as much time as we have before the 2 o'clock Eastern hour. So do send those our way through the chat box there on your screen. So Kathie, I'm not going to take any more time away from you. Why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Okay, will do. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that great intro. And I'm so happy to be here, and thanks to Bloomerang, of course, for hosting. And to everybody out there on the webinar, thank you for taking the time to be here with us. I'm truly thrilled to be able to share this time with you and hopefully make it worth your while. So developing this webinar, I really did it with you in mind and packed it with lots of info that you can walk away with, some solid next steps on how to build a successful major gifts program for your organization. So just a little bit more about me. Stephen did give a great intro, but I wanted to just share with you that before I started my coaching and consulting business, I did work in the nonprofit sector as a staff person, as Stephen said, for about 11 years. So I really do understand the challenges, or at least many of the challenges that you are facing every day in your job. And I'm fortunate to have had a wide range of experience. I was a one-person shop for several organizations, but I've also worked for larger organizations such as the Denver Art Museum, which is a pretty big cultural institution here in Denver, which is where I'm based. And I've done just about everything there is to do in fundraising. I've done capital campaigns, I've run events, written grants, built an annual fund, and of course, major gift fundraising. Hopefully I have that experience if I'm teaching this webinar. So I learned about major gifts by doing this work myself, day in and day out. And before we go on, I just wanted to find out a little bit about you all. Let me see if this is working. Yep. So if you are comfortable and want to use the chat box, this is kind of a great way to be a little bit interactive on the webinars. Even though I can't see all of your smiling faces out there, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. So let me know if you are raising major gifts now at your organization, or if this is something that is brand new to you and you are just trying to get some more information. So you're brand new. And also, wow, you guys are really awesome at this. Really, the results are really coming in. So it looks like a lot of new folks. That's fantastic. And then also, what sector are you working in? Are you in education, social services, the environment, et cetera? I just kind of like to get a sense of who's in here? Oh, yeah, some folks with lots of experience. You could probably be teaching this class. That's great. Okay, a good mix. Fantastic. Well, great. Thank you again for all of you for being on here. And I want to get started now with really kind of the meat of the talk. So I call it the sky's the limit because I really believe that major gift fundraising is sort of limitless because of the passion and the capacity of people in your community. So I like to say the sky's the limit. And I believe if you have a system for raising major gifts and you're putting in the work, you can start raising more money for your organization than you may have thought possible. So my next slide is this quote from Tony Robbins, which I love. I actually have this hanging in my office. The only limit to your impact is your imagination and commitment. And what I love about that quote is that it really says it in our hands, right? We have the power and the control to make whatever we want happen in our lives. And so I challenge you to apply this quote to your work with major gifts. The next slide are these stats, which I'm sure are familiar to some of you, if not all of you. The first is 87% of philanthropic dollars in the U.S. are donated by individuals. And I apologize. I suspect there are folks on the webinar that are outside the U.S., and I don't have that stat for outside the U.S., but I would suspect that it's going to be similar. So this is put out by Giving USA every year, and it includes family foundations. So it varies by 1% or so each year, but it's usually around 87 to 88% of giving comes from individuals. So a lot of times folks who don't know a lot about fundraising think that all of the money comes from foundations or corporations because a lot of times we see those big gifts in the news. But this is clearly not the case. The money is really coming from individuals. And the second stat really speaks specifically to major gifts. So what this is that 80% of funding comes from 20% of donors. And this holds true for a lot of organizations. I probably shouldn't say all organizations because I'm not sure, but I think it holds true for many. And I actually wonder, again, if you want to use a chat box, since you guys are so comfortable with it, putting in, if you know the breakdown for your organization of what percentage of funding comes from those top donors. So this is just kind of an interesting stat to know. And what I hear from a lot of nonprofits is that they're actually seeing more like 90-10, meaning that 90% of funding is coming from 10% of donors. So that's a pretty significant statistic. And I mention these because I encourage you to put your time and energy where it's going to have the biggest payout for your organization. So knowing how busy you are and how many things you have going on as a fundraising professional, it pays to be as efficient as possible. And so it would make sense that you're going to be spending 80 to 90% of your time working with 10 to 20% of your donors because these donors are the ones that can really make a big impact on your work and on your mission. So I just encourage you to spend time where you're going to have the greatest results. So next, I'm going to talk about this 7-step system pretty much throughout the webinar today. And the steps are easy to learn and easy to follow, and it's also a repeatable cycle. So I know and believe that if you follow these steps, you will see results in major gift fundraising for your nonprofit. So these are just the steps. I'm going to do a quick overview, and then we'll get into them in a little bit. So the steps are assessing where you are, making a plan. By prospect, I mean developing your prospect list. 4 is cultivating your prospects and donors. 5 is preparing to make an ask. 6 is actually asking for a gift. And 7 is thanking or stewarding. And like Stephen says, you're going to get all these, so you'll have all this information in detail. So before we get started, though, I would love to just talk about what is a major gift for your organization. And because we have, I'm just looking now at these results. So 90% from 5, yeah, that's a lot. 10%, 30%. Great. Thank you for putting those in. So I'm wondering if you know what a major gift is for your organization. Since a lot of you are new, you might not, and that's fine because we're going to talk about that and help you figure it out. And one thing you probably know is that it varies organization to organization. So if you have a friend who works for ABC nonprofit, it might be completely different from what a major gift is for your organization. So I have this little chart which kind of will get our head in the game a little bit. So this looks at total fundraising income, which is, okay, lots of thousand, enough, 5,000. Great, thank you for all that. So if your budget, this was at total fundraising income, which is budget, and then giving per donor over the course of the year. So if your budget is $1 million and under, a major gift for you might be $5,000 and up, and might even be probably lower than that if you're well over $1 million. So I'll say that when I started my very first fundraising job, I worked for Denver's Rape Crisis Center. So it was a very grassroots organization. Our budget was $1.3 million, and for us, $5,000 was definitely a major gift. In fact, I remember one time we received a check, it's a little unexpected, for $10,000. And my executive director and I were literally jumping up and down in her office with joy because we were so excited. That was actually the biggest gift I had ever raised to date at that time. And so from that job, I went to the Denver Art Museum, where $5,000 was a pretty common gift. Don't get me wrong, we definitely appreciated that gift, but they were common. We didn't jump up and down for $5,000 gifts or even for $10,000 gifts. The Denver Museum has a budget of well over $10 million. So for them, a major gift was $100,000 and up for sure. So this is just kind of a frame to get your head in the game. But I want you to think about what is a major gift for your organization. And there's a really simple way to do this. And so you're going to go to your database and you're going to run a query or a report of all of your giving to your organization for the last year to 2 years. And then you want to sort these gifts from highest to lowest. And then look at those highest gifts. And usually, though, the top 10, 20, or 30 gifts will kind of clump together. They'll be a little separate. And you'll be able to kind of see where that kind of cutoff is. You don't want to look at just the top 1 to 2 gifts, because those probably are an indication of everybody at that highest capacity for your organization. So just look at where that natural break is, and that's about where a major gift is for your organization, at least at this point. Of course, that can change with how your budget changes and how your fundraising changes. So we're going to step right now into those 7 steps and really get down to brass tacks here. So step number 1 is assessing where you are. And this is, as you can see, it has 5 parts to it, and I could have broken it into 5 parts, or 5 different steps, but I really feel that these are all related in a way. They're sort of those fundamental elements that probably most organizations should have in place to do fundraising. And when you start getting into major gifts, these things get to be super critical. So we're going to talk about these separately. We're going to talk about case for support, gift acceptance policy, a donor tracking system or database, a process to acknowledge your donors, and then having the right people. So we'll get right into it. A case for support. So first, we'll take a case for support. A case for support is really telling your prospective donors why they should donate to you. Why are you so great? Why is your mission so critical to your community? You want to start out with a compelling big picture view and then support that with facts and statistics. But then I always caution, don't get too heavy with the facts and stats, because that can get a little bit dry. You want to have an emotional pull. You want to use maybe a client story or something to really draw your prospect and donor in emotionally. You should also include your vision and how their gift to your organization is going to help you to reach that vision, because they want to know how they can make an impact. So if you don't have a formal case for support, I suspect that you have bits and pieces of it already at your organization. So especially if you've been writing grants, because grant proposals often request the types of information you're going to put in for support. They want to know your history. They want to know your impact, whatever results that you can show. These are the same types of things you're going to put in a case for support. So you can, and there's resources online. In fact, I have a free download on my website about how to write a case for support if you want to get into the more of the nitty-gritty of that. So once you get that drafted, edited, maybe your board needs to approve it, whatever process you need to go through, then you can move on to the next step, which is having a gift acceptance policy. So a gift acceptance policy outlines the types of gifts that your organization is equipped to accept. So there's probably some things that you may not want to accept. For example, do you take cars? Do you take boats? Gifts of land, gifts of art, these types of things. Some unusual donations like that. For example, if you get a car, how are you going to deal with that car? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to keep it for your clients for transportation? Are you going to use it for your staff for transportation? Anything specific like that that you can put in writing is great to have for your donors to know how their asset is going to be used once it's donated. So when I worked at the Denver Art Museum, as you might imagine, lots of people wanted to donate their gifts of art, right? We would get these calls. I found this painting in my grandmother's attic. It's beautiful. I really wanted the Denver Art Museum to have it. Well, the Denver Art Museum, because of this, had to have a very accurate and detailed policy about accepting art. They had an appraisal process. The curator had to weigh in on all of this. And so this is obviously probably much more detailed than you would need about accepting art, unless, of course, you're a museum or an art center. But these are just some things to kind of think about. How are you going to handle these things? Another example is that an organization I worked with had a board member who donated a timeshare. So it was a timeshare for a condo in Hawaii. And what they had never gotten a gift like this before. It was a board member, and they certainly wanted to be respectful of that gift. And so they decided to use it as an auction item at their gala, which turned out to be great, and they could kind of sell that year after year, and it kind of got to be a thing. So these are just a couple examples of things to think about. You certainly don't have to think of every scenario in the world, but I just want to get your head thinking of things besides cash and stocks. So just think about that and get those things in writing. The next thing is a donor tracking system. So hopefully you're not using a Rolodex or a filing cabinet anymore. Hopefully you have an electronic database. And if not, now would be a great time to start looking at those and thinking about investing in one for your organization, because with major gift fundraising, there's just a lot to keep track of. And you really want to be able to move your program forward. And so having all of that donor information captured in a database is just super important. So, of course, you'll use it to track donations, but there's so much more information that you can use databases for, especially when it comes to your donor information. So you can record their interests. What programs are they most interested in? What are their interests in general? Do they like to attend events? All kinds of info like this. You can also upload pledge forms. You can save email exchanges with your donors. You can log phone calls. There's just a lot that you can do. And so I just think it's so helpful to have everything in one place that all of your development staff can access. So as long as you have access to the database, you'll all be on the same page in terms of donor relations for each donor that you're working with. I think it also really helps when your fundraising staff moves on to another organization, which we know happens in our sector, right? Folks move on to different positions, which is great. But instead of taking all their donor knowledge with them, they're going to leave it with your organization in the database where it belongs. So, of course, the relationship with the donor is really with the organization, so all of that information should stay with the organization and not go with the fundraising officer. To wrap this up, if you haven't invested in a donor database or you feel yours is maybe inadequate for the work that you're doing, think about investing in one now. Major gifts are just too important to not be able to have that data saved and accessed. The next thing is a process to acknowledge your donors. So when you're doing major gift fundraising, you don't want to send out the same form letter time and time again. You want to have a more sophisticated acknowledgement process. So the system should specify not only how soon a donor letter, but also who's going to sign that letter. So sometimes I see donor acknowledgement systems where at certain levels dictates kind of who's going to sign the letter. So it may be you as a development officer or development director is going to sign at 1,000 and below or 500 and below, whatever would make sense. And then at 1,000 and above or 5,000 and above, you would have your CEO sign or your executive director. And then maybe at some point a board member would sign, or sometimes you would have two signatures. But you want to just kind of figure that out. And then sometimes a donor might actually get a phone call. And if that's the case, then who's going to make that call? These are the types of things you want to think about ahead of time and just document so everybody understands. One organization that I know, it's an after-school program for low-income kids. They send a photo of this year's class of students to donors of $25,000 and above. And then other donors to this organization receive a handwritten thank you note from a student. So think about what special things make sense for your organization and what you might do for your highest donors. Step, or the last element of step number 1, is to have the right people. You can't do this work on your own. There's a lot that goes into it. It takes a lot of time. And so the best thing to do is to pull together some key volunteers, including some board members, to form a major gifts committee. You could certainly use your development committee for this work, but I like to have a focused major gifts committee if you have the volunteer capacity to do that. And this committee can be super helpful if you engage them in the right ways. And I'm going to talk about that as we go through the rest of the webinar of ways you can pull in these key volunteers. I'm going to just take one more look at the things we talked about, these 5 things: the case for support, gift acceptance policy, donor tracking system, process to acknowledge donors, and then the right people. So once you have those 5 elements in place, you can really start with your major gifts program in earnest. So step number 2 is to make a plan. So I have these 2 graphics here to represent what I think are the 2 most important parts of your plan. And the first is your goal, of course. How much are you trying to raise? And the second is your timeline. And I'll talk about both of these. I'm going to start with the goal because it's probably the most important thing. You need to know how much you're going to raise. So there's a whole process about how to set a fundraising goal, but let's say for this exercise that you set a goal of $200,000. So how do we get to $200,000? So here's a gift chart, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. So here's a gift chart to raise $200,000, and there are gift chart calculators online, which is actually how I made this one. Just Google gift chart calculator, and you'll find them, and you just plug in whatever your goal is, and then it will spit out a gift chart similar to this. So, but a few things about a gift chart that I'd like you to keep in mind. One is a gift chart is really just a place to start. You really want to tweak it for your own organization. You need to think about the capacity of your own donors and prospects to be sure that these gift levels really make sense for your organization. So just know that it's just a place to start. It's not set in stone. Second, you definitely want your largest gift to be at least 10% of your overall goal. Something closer to 25% is actually better. So in this case, if we're raising $200,000, you might want your largest gift to be $50,000 instead of the $20,000 that they show here. So if you have a donor with that capacity, then you might want to shoot for that $50,000 gift. The third thing I'd like you to look at is the third column, which is the number of prospects. So we always want prospects than gifts, right? Because not everybody is going to say yes. It's generally accepted that you should have 4 prospects for every 1 gift. Some people say 3, and 3 can work at those high levels where you really know your prospects well and you're pretty certain that they're going to donate at the level you have them plugged in for. But I just like to have 4 just to be super conservative. So the last thing about a gift chart to keep in mind is don't get too caught up in it. I mean, it's like I said, it's a tool, but I think I can safely say that campaigns never, ever will really run exactly how the gift chart kind of predicts, because it's just kind of a way to get your head in the game of how many donors you need at these. So these things can be tweaked along the way. As you're starting to raise money and you see kind of where the gifts are coming in, you can tweak the gift chart accordingly. Now here's a question that I've been asked. Do I really need to get these big gifts? Can I just raise $200,000 from getting a bunch of smaller gifts, say $100 gifts? Now this question makes perfect sense, right? Because of course it's much easier to get a $100 gift than it is to get a gift for $20,000, right? So I have to learn this all about how this works in my very first fundraising job at the Raise Prices Center. So I mentioned before I worked at the Raise Prices Center, very grassroots, and I was planning our annual fundraising luncheon. And our fundraising goal was something like $30,000. And so I said to my boss, the executive director, well, this is going to be easy. We'll just sell a bunch of tickets to the luncheon. I'm going to write the best solicitation letter ever, and lots of people will want to attend our luncheon. Well, my executive director, I just kind of have to laugh when I think about this. My executive director was very kind, and she did not laugh at me. And she said, well, let's get the sponsorship package put together and sent out. Because my executive director knew that at $50 a ticket, we would need to sell 600 tickets in order to raise $30,000, which meant I needed to send about 2,400 letters, right, because I need 4 prospects for every gift. And then for any of you who have done this type of fundraising, I would probably have to make hundreds of follow-up calls for those letters, because letters in and of themselves are not always that effective. So in the end, we did raise the $30,000, but it came from selling 300 tickets, and then we raised another $15,000 in sponsorship. And that's when I learned that you don't make big money on events through ticket sales. The real money comes from sponsorship, and it's exactly the same thing with major gifts. You really need those big gifts in order to reach those big goals. So we talked a lot about the fundraising goal and your gift chart. And the next thing I want to just talk quickly about is a timeline, because you want to have some basic parameters in place before you get started. Otherwise, these things tend to drag on and on. So make sure that your board is on the same page with this. Your major gifts committee, everybody agrees on the timeline. So what is the start date? What is the end date? Are you going to have? Is this going to go for a year? Is it going to go for? Is it kind of a small campaign that's going to go for 6 months? You're going to do it for 3 years. Think about all that. And then, what are your milestones? When do you think you're going to be able to secure that lead gift? Because that lead gift really kind of sets the stage for everything else. Knowing these types of milestones, when these big gifts are going to come in, is going to help you to back out from there all the steps that you need to take, scheduling meetings and all of that, in order to reach those goals. So that's pretty much step 2. Step 3 is your major gift prospect list. So the major gift prospect list, if you don't have one, there's an easy way to start one, and I know that there's a lot of folks here just starting this, so this is great. So you're going to go to your database, and you can run a report, actually 2 reports. You're going to run a report of your highest donors, which are the donors making the largest gifts, and also your most loyal donors. So loyal donors are those that have been donating to your organization for a long time. Their gifts may not be large, but they've been with you for a long time, even for maybe 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years or more. These folks are super invested in your mission, so it really makes sense to put them on your major gift prospect list. So that's it. That's your list to start. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is qualifying prospects, which I think is something that gets missed oftentimes. So after you have your prospect list, what is qualifying prospects? This is a way that you can figure out how to use your wisely and where you're going to have the best chances to raise the most amount of money, which, knowing how this hope sounds a good plan, right? So to qualify prospects, you're going to engage your major gift committee. It's a great place to pull them in, and you want to think about linkage, interest, and ability. So you may have heard this term LIA. That's what it stands for, linkage, interest, and ability. So you have your major gifts committee meeting, and for each person at the meeting, you have a copy of the prospect list. So after each prospect name, I'm sorry, I have a call coming in. I thought I had turned that off on my phone. After each prospect name, you want to have 3 columns. You have linkage, interest, and ability. And as a group, you're going to be rating each prospect for these 3 qualities. You can use a scale from 0 to 5, where 0 is no connection and 5 is the best connection, or 0 to 10, whatever makes the most sense for your organization. So we're going to start with linkage. Linkage is an indication of your organization's relationship with this person, with the prospect or donor. So for example, if prospect A, let's call him Bob, and Bob is best friends with your board chair. So Bob's score for linkage might be a 5 because you have a way to connect with this person. After you do linkage, you're going to go on to interest. So say prospect Bob is well known in the community as a patron of the arts. So you work for a public school. If Bob doesn't generally support education causes, it may not matter how good of friends your board job, his interest score is probably only a 0 or a 1. And then you go to ability. If Bob has high capacity, give him a 4 or 5 for ability. You can also check your database, because if this person is already a donor, just look at any clues you might have about especially their ability to give and other things in order to help you score these folks on linkage, interest, and ability. Then after you've done this exercise for all of your prospects, you can total the scores, and the prospects with the highest score should be your initial targets for major gift fundraising. Now, I hope you see that it's important to have all three qualities present for someone to be a good major gift prospect to your organization. It really doesn't matter how much money someone has, because if they don't have an interest in your mission, or if you don't have a way to gain an introduction to them, their money is probably a moot point. So, in fact, you probably have someone in your organization that's always being suggested as a potential donor. I know we have some of these folks in Denver that are high profile in the community, and so folks are always saying, why don't you get so-and-so? And so if there's anybody, I always use Bill Gates as an example. If there's anyone on the webinar from Seattle, the person might be Bill Gates. The board members or anyone trying to be helpful might say, let's get Bill Gates. Let's ask him for a gift. He's got money. Well, of course, because Bill Gates and his wife have capacity, and we know they're philanthropic, just because of that, it doesn't mean they're interested in supporting your mission. In the U.S., the Gates fund mostly education and access to information technology. But even if you're in the education sector, you would still need to get a connection to access Bill Gates, and he's probably pretty hard to track down. So maybe someone in your organization does have a connection to Bill or Melinda Gates, and then that would be great. But otherwise, it's challenging to get to some of those folks. So just, again, going back to those three qualifiers, linkage, interest, and ability, you need to have all three present in order to make sense to have a prospect on your list. So that's it for prospects. I just want to swing back around to this process just to see where we're at. We've talked about assessing where you are. We've talked about making a plan, and we've talked about your prospect list. The next thing we're going to get into is cultivating your prospects. And so cultivating your prospects is essentially building a relationship with your prospects and helping them to learn about your work and mission. So for each of your top prospects in major gift work, you want to have an individualized cultivation plan based on your prospect's interest. So this is a pretty critical step, and it's a great place to get help from your major gift committee. You want to be thoughtful about each step in the process and who is the right staff person or volunteer to complete each step. So on the next slide, I have this sample cultivation plan, and I realize that there's a lot of information on here, and this is just a sample, and yours will probably look completely different. There's some similarities, but this is just kind of to get you thinking about the types of things that you should be adding to your cultivation plan. So this is for a donor named Jane Simon. She's a fictional donor who is interested in the Aurora after-school program. And so for each cultivation or touch point, you see that I've created an agenda or some goals for that particular thing. And then I have another column for notes to put in a database, because I really think it's important to track all of these steps. So here I have things like coffee meetings, site visit, email follow-up, etc. Every touch that you're going to have with the donor or prospect should go into the cultivation plan. So just looking at a couple of these things, we have a coffee meeting. I want to ask Jane questions about her interests, other organizations that she supports, ask her if she's interested in a facility tour, and then document anything that I've learned in the database. She's interested in helping low-income students access college. That's great. Then I send an email thank you, the same day if possible, or the next day. Just thanking her for her time. It doesn't have to be long. She's interested in the tour, so see if you can get that scheduled right then and there. Then you do the facility. For this after-school program, I make sure that I have a couple of students there that can talk to Jane about the program. Again, anything you learn, put that in the database. So we learned that Jane's interested in the math program. Great, put that in the database. Follow-up phone call, thanking her for her visit, log the call. Any notes that you learned, put those in the database. So we just keep going through step by step until we're ready to ask Jane to make a gift, and that comes later in the process. So fundraisers often ask me, how long should we cultivate a donor before we ask for a gift? And that is a great question. Unfortunately, there's not a great answer, because it really varies. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on how much money you're going to ask for. Generally, you want to cultivate longer if you're going to ask a gift. How well you know the donor to start. and the donor's wishes. Some donors don't like to be cultivated. They don't want to spend the time having coffee with you and making small talk. It's just the way that it is. And they want you to just kind of, if they're interested in the program, they kind of want you to cut to the chase. And hopefully you're going to learn that early on while cultivating your donor if they're not that interested in cultivation. So this example shows about 4.5 months. It might take much longer. For example, I worked with charter school network in Denver, and they were introduced to a person with significant capacity who they eventually asked for a $7 million gift, but it took a full 2 years, actually longer than 2 years, a little bit longer, from the day that they first met the person until they asked for that $7 million. A lot of visits at the person's office, at the school, and then even after they asked for the gift, the donor asked a lot of questions about how the money would be used, super detailed things, wanted a lot of financial information, stuff that had been provided partially in the case for support and in the proposal, but still he kind of wanted things in a different form. So then had to go back and do this written proposal according to his specifications, and then it was submitted. So my point is that major gifts take time. You probably wouldn't want to ask someone for a 7-figure gift just a few weeks after meeting them, right? You just really need the time to get to know them and what's important to them. So that's the next thing I'd like to talk about is preparing for the ask. So I believe there are 4 things you want to do a good job in preparing for the ask. And I like to make this step by step because I do think that it's super important. So the first thing is you want to make sure that the donor knows why you're meeting, right? This makes perfect sense. So going back to Jane Simon, I want to know that we're meeting to talk about her support of the after-school program. What you don't want to do is ask Jane if she wants to meet to ask for her advice when, in fact, you're going to ask her for a gift, because that's a sure way to get things off on the wrong foot. You really want to set up that expectation up front that you're going to be talking about support. The second thing is think about who's going to be at this meeting. Is it going to be you with your CEO, or possibly you with the board member? Or maybe because Jane likes the math program, maybe you want to get the math program director involved somehow in the meeting. So figure out who has the best connection to your prospect, and also think about who your prospect would have the hardest time saying no to, right? So that might be a person you want to bring on the visit. So if it's going to be you and another person, and I actually do strongly suggest that it's a 2-person ask for a number of reasons. I've written a blog post about why it's good to ask in pairs that you can find on my website. But if you are doing it with another person, think about who's going to say what. You really want to have those talking points ironed out before the meeting, so that you're not stumbling over what you're going to say, or you're saying what your partner's supposed to say. Figure out what that is. And you might even do some role playing, especially if a volunteer is joining you, because volunteers, they don't have your organization day in and day out the way that you do. They're not as comfortable with the talking points. So think about what the talking points are going to be, and then think about maybe role-playing those. So the third thing is think about the questions that your prospect might be asking. I have found that once you're on for a gift, they suddenly have a whole bunch of questions. So they may be asking, how much are you trying to raise? What are you going to be using my money for specifically? How many students are you going to be helping? How many dogs are you going to be helping? Clients, wetlands, whatever your mission is addressing, how many of these things are going to be impacted by my gift? How soon do you need this money, they might ask. So if I have answered a bunch of these questions already in your case for support, you probably did while you were talking through the opportunity. But sometimes they don't hear everything, so you want to be prepared to answer all these questions. Just think about what they're going to be and be prepared to answer them. And then the fourth thing to think about before, as you're preparing, is how much you're going to ask for, right? This is something you don't want to be thinking about at the last minute or trying to figure out during the meeting. You want to have that nailed down before you get into the meeting. So I recommend, of course, first going to your database. If this person's a current donor, what are they giving to your organization now and in the past? So going back to Jane Simon, if Jane's been giving $2,500 in the past, consider asking her for $5,000. But I also recommend doing some outreach. So you would, of course, be doing outside research if this person was a prospect and not a current donor. because you want to see what they're giving in the community. So see what Jane's giving to other organizations. If she's giving more, like 10 or 20,000 to other organizations, then consider asking for more than 5,000. And here's another place you can pull in your major gifts committee, because for a couple of reasons. Pull them in and consult with them on what you want the ask to be. So first reason is you want to have a lot of brains on this. Your major gifts committee is out in the community as much or more than you are, and they may have some great information on Jane and her capacity to give. The second reason you want to bring in your volunteers is you don't want to make this decision on your own. You want everybody to be on the same page. Because let's say you go out, let's say you're asking for a $1,000 gift. You go out and you ask for that $1,000 gift, but you didn't consult anybody, and then your major gifts committee says, or your board, or your executive director, well, why didn't you ask for $2,000? I thought that person had more capacity. You just want everybody to be on the same page. So after all that preparation, here as you are at the ask, the big moment that you've been working up to. So those new to major gifts often ask, what do I say? What are the words I actually use to ask for this big chunk of money? First of all, my biggest piece of advice is just to relax. This is just a conversation. And if you've been doing the cultivation right, you've had a lot of conversation with this donor already, and you know something about them. They're a friend. They're a friend to your organization. You've let the prospect know that the visit is to discuss support for the organization, so she or he is not going to be caught off guard. They're expecting you to ask for a gift, and they're ready for you to ask for a gift. And the other thing to keep in mind is that you're presenting this person with an opportunity to make an impact in this world. In Jane Simon's case, Jane can help more kids access the after-school math program that she believes is important for their education. You know this better than anyone. Fundraising is super fulfilling for donors. They're making an impact, and major gifts are even more so because it can be a bigger impact. So when they can make an impact that they care about, this makes them happy. And you are helping your donors to feel that happiness by connecting them to a cause that they care about. And that is just magical. I just love that part of major gift fundraising. So I am going to get into some more specifics for you about what this ask visit can look like or should look like. So this is kind of the outline of a basic ask conversation. I'll walk through everything. So the first thing is just some small talk. Just like if you were going to go for coffee with a friend or a colleague. You're not going to just jump right into it. You'll make some small talk. How are your kids? How are your grandkids? Whatever makes sense for this prospect that you know because you've been cultivating, so you know a few things about them. After the small talk, you're going to thank them for something. If they're a donor, then you thank them for their past support. If they're new to the organization, you can thank them for their interest. Thank them for taking the time to meet with you. Thank them for something. The next part is opportunity. So here is where you're going to explain how gifts like theirs have helped your organization in the past. You can share a story about someone who's benefited from your services. You can also share this year's goals, or the goals of the campaign, and how gifts are going to help moving forward. I like to have this step 4 involving your prospect because you really want to make sure you involve the prospect in the conversation as much as possible. I know we get excited about our mission because we're doing such great work that we keep the conversation super one-sided, and you really want to involve your prospect, which is why I call it out in a separate step. You're continuing to build a relationship with this person. So, of course, you answer whatever questions they have as you go along, and you can also ask them open-ended questions such as, what are your thoughts about our plans for next year, just to keep them in the conversation. Now, after you've explained the opportunity, you're going to actually make the ask. This is the big step. So if you're doing a visit with 2 people from your organization, generally one person would do the opportunity part and the second person would do the ask part. Now we talked earlier about how to determine how much to ask for, and I forgot to mention that I don't recommend for a range, such as $5,000 to $10,000 or $500 to $1,000 or whatever the range is for your organization, because inevitably the donor or the prospect will go for the smaller amount. So if you really want $1,000, and you believe they have the capacity and the inclination to give you $1,000, then by all means ask for that $1,000. Now, after you ask, it's super important to not say anything else. So I have it as a separate step too. Sometimes askers get nervous at this point. They're thinking, oh my goodness, I just asked this person for $50,000 or whatever the amount is. Maybe I need to say something more. Maybe I need to explain things better. I don't think I did a very good job. The silence is awfully uncomfortable. I really want to say something. My advice to you is please don't say anything else. You need to give the prospect time to think about what you just asked. If you start talking again, they're going to lose their train of thought. Plus, it makes you look unsure. You want to appear confident and comfortable, asking this person to support the work and the mission that you both care so much about. So you let the ask sink in, and you wait for a reply. If the donor says yes, well, that's fantastic. Then say, thank you so much. Great. Maybe you want to pledge form together. If the donor hedges and says, I need to check with my financial planner, or I need to check with my husband or my wife or somebody or something else, you say, I completely understand. May I call you next week to follow up? And, of course, you want to be sure to make that call. Maybe you put a reminder in your calendar or in your database to make sure that that call happens. So before you leave the visit, you want to just answer any final questions and then make sure you're clear on your next steps and then wrap up. The next thing is this step 7, which is thanking and stewarding. So after you've received a pledge or a gift, you want to thank your donor and get that initial thank you letter or phone call out the door ASAP. Within 3 days for letters that are best practices, but I like to shoot for 24 hours if at all possible, especially for major gifts. And if it's a truly major gift, you might ask your executive director or your board chair to make a thank you call within hours of receiving the pledge. So whatever stewardship you plan, make sure that's documented so that you don't lose track of it, and put it in your database or put it in your calendar to make sure that you're doing that follow-up. So as I wrap up, and I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A at the end, I just want to go, I'm not going to go through all the steps again, but just to get those in front of you one more time. So the great thing about the system, like I mentioned earlier, is that it's repeatable. So after you've done step 7, thanking and stewarding, you want to go back again to assessing. And you want to look at your case for support and think, does this still make sense for my organization? You don't want it to get stale or not make sense for where you are in your development. Your acknowledgement letter is the same thing. Keep freshening those things up. Keep personalizing those as much as possible. And then finally, I want to say thank you all for being here. And I have a gift that is for you. If you go to my website, which is arroyofundraising.com, and /gift, there's a free guide, Conquer Your Fear of Asking for Money. And all you need to do is put in your email address, and then I'll get that sent off to you immediately. And so that's it. So thank you. Stephen, I think, is going to get back on, and we're going to do some Q&A with however much time that we have left.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Kathie. That was really awesome information, and we had a lot of activity in the chat room. So thanks to everyone for talking and asking questions, and we're going to try to get to some questions now. We probably got probably 9 or 10 minutes for questions. And Kathie, is it fair to say that you're available to take questions via email if we can't get to quite everything?
Oh, of course, yes. People can always email me.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, let me just kind of roll through the chat here. Amy had a question about cultivations. She says sometimes it can be very difficult to make a personal contact, and there's not a personal connection, though obviously interest-based on giving history. How many and within what time frame would you call, write, and email to ask for a meeting with a potential donor? And actually a couple people were asking about the time frame to get a meeting. What tips would you have for maybe the cadence on that?
That is a fabulous question, and there's a little bit of an art. I mean, it's not super science-based. There's a little bit of an art to that, and so you want to be what I call, you want to be persistent, politely persistent, right? So you need to keep kind of pushing that a little bit, but very politely. So it depends on the donor. It depends on how well you know them to start. So say it's just a new prospect and you email them and you don't get a reply. So then I would probably follow up with a phone call. And there's a whole debate about should you leave a message, should you not leave a message, right? So I suggest playing around with both. And, one thing you can do is if you're not getting a response is say, I'm going to be in your neighborhood, this and this date, at this and this time. Can I stop by your office or your home for 20 minutes, right? Just make it as easy as possible for them. and see if that can get you anywhere. But as far as how long do you wait, I mean, it is a little bit of it's just a little bit of a trial and error thing, I would say.
Cool. Jill has a question here. Jill says, we raise money for international efforts, which means they can't conduct any sort of tours or introduce, a potential donor to someone in person. What ideas would you have for making that personal connection when they can't necessarily, visit a physical facility or meet someone who's impacted?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And so I'm guessing calls are probably tough too, because you could always Skype. So I like to think about, if you are challenged in those types of ways, just really focus on the things that you can do and not the things that you can't do. So if it is, so we are blessed with great technology now, and so is there a way that you can Skype? Can you put things on your website that they can kind of pull off of there? Is there sort of a private place on your website that they can put in a code and it can be super personalized for them? You're always trying to have Major Gift work be as personalized as possible. So what are those types of things that you can make it super personalized by having special access pages on your website, or special calls, special Skype? I mean, hopefully you can work some of those things in, because you don't have the opportunity to have the one-on-ones, but could some of your clients connect with them via Skype or via the mail?
Cool. Yeah, there's technology out there. We can make that happen. We've got an interesting question here from Lanny, and Lanny's wondering, is it possible to pursue a major gift for operating support, or do we need to do you have to present, a special project, maybe like a building or something like that for the gift? Is it better to have, a specific sort of tangible purpose, or can you actually get this for just the operating budget?
I think it's possible to get it for the operating budget, but it's probably more challenging. I think donors just seem to be getting more and more sophisticated about their giving now, and they really want their money tied to a specific thing. So there's always, it could be something in your operating support that you need that money for anyway, right? So say you have a specific program that is part of your general operating budget, that you can present that as an opportunity for a donor to support. So I actually like to go to donors with kind of a menu, I call it a menu of options, where there's different things that they can plug into. And so depending on your organization, it might be, if you're environmental, it might be helping to support this particular conservation cause, or that particular conservation cause, either geographically or whatever the parameters are for your organization. But I do like to give donors options as much as possible for places that they can plug in. And you'll learn a lot about their interests that way too, by presenting them with different opportunities, and they can kind of tell you what they lean toward.
Right. Cool. We've got one from Terry here. Terry's wondering, should you qualify someone as a major donor based on their total annual giving, or are there other criteria you would use to qualify a potential major donor?
Okay, so I'm guessing Terry means if this person gives a number of gifts over the year, so say they're giving smaller gifts over the course of the year, does that sort of count? And I say that it does count, because there's still, the cumulative giving is still significant. So if they're giving, say, $100 gifts monthly, well, that adds up to $1,200 over the course of the year, which is pretty significant. So I actually do like to look at cumulative giving and see where that lands for your donors.
Okay. Here's a really interesting question from Rich. Rich says, if our organization is not well known, but an influential peer of theirs gives us a strong recommendation and there's affinity and capacity, how well does the strong peer influence go in overcoming the person not really knowing the organization? Is that pretty powerful? Is that just a little bit of a help, or what advice would you give to Rich there?
I think that is actually fantastic, because influential peers are kind of who you're always trying to get involved with your organization. You're trying to get these sorts of folks on your board and on your committees, because what I have found is that a person like that, a volunteer, is going to have is likely going to get better results than you as a staff person could ever get, because they hang out with these people, right? They're friends with the people that you're trying to get to, so it's actually probably the best thing you can have. So I would say if that person is willing to help you, then you want them to be part of your team on the major gifts team. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So Jenny here had a question while you were talking about actually, doing the ask. She's wondering if someone says no, but there's a connection made, maybe you can kind of sense something there. What should you do to continue to cultivate if someone says no? I mean, certainly that doesn't have to be the end of the road, it seems like.
No, definitely, and that is a great question. So when someone says no, I think that the most important thing is to just try to gently ask them why they're saying no. Is it that the program was it the opportunity itself that is presented? Are they interested in a different program? Is it the timing? I mean, is it okay to come back to them in 3 months or 6 months? I think there's a lot of reasons that people say no. Sometimes they're maybe caught off guard. I will say you'll get no less often if you've done the cultivation leading up to that point, but you're definitely still going to hear no, as we all do as fundraisers. So I think it's important to kind of understand, is this really no, or is it just no for now? And then gently asking, is it okay if I contact you again in 3 to 6 months and see where that takes you?
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. We've probably got time for one more question, and I want to get to the topic of prospect research, because a lot of people asked about this. Do you think it's necessary that someone pay for a wealth screening service or a prospect research type of service or software, or do you think that information can be collected from other places? What's your opinion on that?
Oh boy, that is a good question. And I think that depends on a lot of things. I think it depends on your budget, first of all, because those types of services tend to be a little bit pricey.
Yeah.
And I think it depends on the capacity of your staff, because there's a lot of free resources online. In fact, I did a blog post about free prospect research, but it takes a lot of time, right? You're Googling people and you're tracking down these leads and trying to research their companies and all this stuff. It takes a ton of time. So it's out there, but it depends on how much you have time for. So I'm certainly not going to say that you shouldn't do it, but I think you should think carefully about what can you get before you go there, because there is stuff out there that you can find, and I wouldn't start out by doing that. Let's just say that. I've certainly done it. I've certainly used wealth screening, and you can get some great information, but it's not the first place that I would start.
Okay. Well, cool. We've got just a couple minutes left, and I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find out more about you, maybe sign up for your newsletter or send you an email. I know we didn't get to quite all the questions, and I apologize for that, but hopefully you'll be able to answer some offline after the presentation here. That
is fine. And so thank you, Stephen. Yes, you can. My website is arroyofundraising.com, and so if you go there, you can there's a box on every page that you fill in your email address, and you'll get my free gift, Conquer Your Fear. And then also that automatically puts you on my newsletter list. I only send one newsletter a week. You're not going to get a million things from me every week. Send one newsletter with tips about fundraising in it. And I do a weekly blog, so you can get all that information. You can search for different topics that you're interested in. I have some free resources there, and there's also a contact page, so you can send me an email anytime. Happy to answer any questions that you have about your fundraising and kind of where you're at. And if you sign up for my email list, I often do free strategy sessions. I send that out to my email list, and then you can sign up and have a 20-minute free strategy session with me to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So cool. If you're interested, just go to my website, and there's all kinds of stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. I would encourage everyone to do that. Really good blog posts. I've been sharing a couple of them as you've been talking, Kathie, and really good stuff there. So I hope everyone checks that out and takes advantage of that opportunity. So just so everyone knows, we do these webinars once a week. We've got some really cool ones coming up in the rest of August. Next week we're going to be talking about donor data and a little later on this month we're going to be talking about silent auctions. So I know event season is fast approaching, so if you're doing events in the fall, definitely sign up for one of those. Totally free, totally educational, and would love to see you on one of the next webinars. So I just want to thank you again, Kathie, for joining us for an hour, and thank everyone else for taking an hour out of their day. Thanks again for being here, Kathie.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and Bloomerang for hosting. I really enjoyed it. I really had fun connecting with everybody, and I hope to connect with you via my newsletter moving forward.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. And just so everyone knows, I will be sending out the recording just a little later on this afternoon, so look for an email from me. And when you exit this webinar, you're going to be sent to a little feedback form. I'd love to hear what you thought of the webinar. You won't hurt my feelings. I don't think it'll hurt Kathie's if you share some feedback with us, so please do that. So we'll call it a day at that. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you next week. Bye now.